This is a special presentation from French Road Elementary School.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Again, we're going to get started now. This is the virtual town hall for French Road, and we're going to start with some comments regarding hybrid instruction. Just ask everybody if they can hit mute. It's helpful. We certainly would love to hear any feedback that you have. Hopefully, we won't hear my dog barking in the meantime, but it'll be helpful for everybody to hear as we walk through everything. And then please jump in with questions, comments, suggestions when we get to that portion of the agenda. We'll spend some time in the chat as well, and we'll check any comments that pop up on the Facebook Live broadcast also. I'm going to turn to Dr. Rio for a couple comments here and there too, and to clarify and welcome her. I know there are several board members here as well as several other administrators. And Caitlin O'Neill, our assistant principal at French Road, has joined us as well. Starting right out, we'll go right to the beginning. Person here has mentioned looking forward to students being in person full-time. Will that be possible in the fall? And this is a really great question, this first comment here. There are several in this exchange and the remote exchange, and actually in the exchanges for the three other buildings as well, several comments about this that I do want to point out. And basically, you know, it's the long and the short of it is this answer. One, we would like to have kids back full-time right now and recognize that that's not possible. And let me give you kind of the long story around this, because I know several people want to ask these questions. With the current thinking around 6 feet of distancing, it is impossible for us to have all of our kids come back. So it's not just about classroom instruction. It's also about cafeteria and other eating spaces, because that's when people would have their masks removed. And it's also about transportation and about movements in hallways, right? Because even if you were able to find distance in classrooms, you still can't find that distance at those other times as well. So that's the big hurdle for us. And frankly, nothing has changed since September, when that was the original hurdle. In fact, we saw infection rates go way up as of several weeks ago. They've gone back down again, which is great. But the variables haven't really changed. I know we see that the light is at the end of the tunnel. We're in a home stretch, but it's a long home stretch. So the other issue becomes this notion of, well, will they reduce distancing? And they started wrestling. They started these other high-risk sports. I don't get it. Well, I don't get it either. I'm with you on that. The idea that you can roll around on a mat with your face a few inches from somebody else, but you can't be in a classroom listening to a global studies lecture at the high school level doesn't make a ton of sense to me. However, when you do dig into that with public health experts, who are the ones who made these decisions, not us, they will explain to you that the way transmission occurs, the amount of time people spend exchanging droplets, the exposure of only 2 people wrestling each other at once, etc., and the voluntary nature of that as opposed to having to be in a classroom are all reasons that went into their thinking around allowing that to happen. And also a lower prevalence in athletic communities that they've seen when there's been outside of school athletic activities happening. All that being said, I get it. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me either, and it's frustrating. I'm glad that our kids are masking when they're participating in our high-risk sports. I'm glad that our coaches, athletic director Nate Merritt, many people have done a great job creating safety plans around this. But it does complicate this issue of, but why can't we then come back to school? And I get that. The other issue for us is our obligation to keep everyone safe. That includes our staff. And vaccinations are still not widely available. That's been a problematic situation for us and for all educators. And we have an obligation to maintain health and safety for the people that come here to work every day as well. And so that's a consideration in this, the access to a vaccine being a problem in terms of having more people come in the building. Take it one step further. There's been this conversation about, well, the president and the CDC have said all schools should reopen. And they've said teachers don't need to be vaccinated before you reopen. I just want to clarify that what they're talking about when they talk about reopening is what we are currently doing. What they're really speaking to are issues related to schools where nobody has darkened their doorstep since the beginning of the year. They do not have hybrid instruction happening. When they're talking about reopening, they're talking about models such as ours for reopening. They're not necessarily talking about fully reopening. I'm sure in some cases they have, but for the most part, that's not what they're talking about. Excuse me. Likewise, when they're talking about teachers don't need to be vaccinated, well, that's correct, because in the current context in our hybrid model, teachers didn't need to be vaccinated. So again, when they're talking about that model, they're saying that staff members don't need to be vaccinated because of distancing, because of masking. But for us to bring back more kids would require, again, less distancing, and we're not at a point where that's possible yet. The other issue is, well, other schools are doing this. There are 5 days of instruction happening other places. They've been able to bring people back. I can't speak for the size of buildings or the size of classrooms or the resource ability, the number of staff members perhaps that they have available to them where they've been able to do that and find a way to still keep people distant, still follow the guidelines and the best practices. Everybody has different variables. Not everybody has been as connected to maybe the guidelines or the regulations, and actually some people are seeing some repercussions from that and being told to do things differently. So some schools have decided, not as many locally, but it has happened, to do certain things that they've then been corrected on. We will not do that. We will continue to maintain a high health and safety standard, and that is what I think has kept our rate low and kept kids and adults very safe as well. And then finally, there's been another question about, well, why not return to school on the Wednesdays? Because some districts have decided to do that. Well, that has happened in part because they have not felt great about their Wednesday program for a variety of reasons. And again, I can't speak for those districts, but they have made some of those decisions based on that experience. We have weighed that and we will continue to monitor that. But at this point, there's no plan to do that because the cost benefit. And it's a cost benefit relative to instruction. It's not a financial cost benefit. If you were to gain one more day of in-person instruction every other week, so really you're talking about maybe 10 days or so between now and the end of the year. I haven't counted that, but it's a small number of days. You'd be on the other end adding an additional asynchronous day. And we've decided that the Wednesday is a better solution than what you lose in terms of what is happening on that day to gain an asynchronous day for only a limited number of additional in-person days by doing the every other week. Again, we'll continue to monitor that. We understand why other districts have made that choice, but many have still maintained the Wednesday. And we've felt pretty good. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's the best, but I'm saying people have worked awfully hard and put together what we think is a pretty meaningful day on Wednesdays, and that for many families that is working. And so right now we'll continue to maintain that. But again, this is just one comment, but gets at a whole bunch of these that I wanted to address right off the bat. And certainly as other comments come up or we get to the portion where we're asking you to jump in, love to follow up with any of those and explain further and hear your feedback as well. The second comment, availability, hopefully increased access to vaccines, very, similar again along the same line. Third one was in light of very low virus transmission, close contact sports, et cetera. I will say this because somebody's asked what steps have been taken. We are in meetings regularly, weekly, sometimes daily, with whether it is elected officials, public health officials, you name it, we're talking to them and expressing our deep concern about our inability to bring more kids back to school and thinking about metrics around there. What would it take to be able to bring people back to school? What would it take for social distancing to be able to reduce so we can have more people in the building? So that's a very active conversation for us. And we will continue to talk about that. It does, much of that hinges on this notion, though, also of making sure that within our buildings, those that are most likely to spread, which are older students, but frankly adults, that they have been vaccinated and achieved some level of immunity from that vaccination, which again takes some time also. Our kids' years at FRES are foundational and instrumental to their success down the road. Failure rate at BHS presented in yesterday's board meeting is alarming. If CDC guidelines don't change, what out-of-the-box ideas, workarounds are being considered for reopening so that we change the status quo? Well, I would say we're very hopeful that the vaccination will happen and that by the end of the year, the end of the school year, there will be enough of an immunity achieved through that reopening in September looks as close to normal as it possibly can. I would expect masking until there's a children's vaccine to be something that we see. I don't know that for sure. As I often say, I'm not a real doctor, but I think that's a strong possibility. And other precautions will be taken, but I do see the real strong possibility that things will get much more back to normal going into next year. Great comment here about all the extra effort at FRES. We appreciate that. I talked about the in-person issue as well. A comment here about art tech and music teachers communicate with parents directly when remote work is assigned, including required Zoom attendance. Dr. Rio, any comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I read that and thought that would be great feedback. I can share back. I do think many of them are communicating with families directly. That's typically what we do at FRES, but maybe in the remote world, it looks a bit different. So I'll bring that back to our team and share that with them. But also feel free to reach out to those teachers at any time. You don't have to go directly through the homeroom teacher.
Thank you. Again, a lot of follow-up comments with similar ideas. Also here, thank you to third grade teacher. Appreciate that. Reopening schools is up to localities according to the governor. Not sure there's clear ownership around whose decision is to reopen. Listen, I'm going to be very candid with everybody here who's here tonight. The governor is really, really good at that. You'll notice very clearly a shift in how this is working, whether it was the high-risk sport decision or some of the restaurant bar decisions. He would issue in a press conference kind of an edict. Great, we can do this if the local health authorities agree. So he's done a masterful job of gaining credit for reopening certain things while still hinging that decision on other people. We do not have a choice to reopen schools. We are still operating on a model from the Department of Health and with the County Health Department where our plans had to be approved for reopening, and we are still under the same guidelines that we were. So it is not up to us to fully reopen if we can't adhere to the guidelines that they've given us. So just understand, I'm not being negative or difficult about that, just pointing out that what is said through press conferences or press releases and what then the rules we have to follow are sometimes very different things. That's just a reality. That's not a criticism or a compliment. It is what it is. Love to hear the positive feedback here about teacher communication, about Mrs. Parker and Mr. Dozier, et cetera. Any thoughts around this, Dr. Rio, around plans to transition fifth graders?
We've started talking about that a bit, what it will look like, and we do anticipate that the fifth graders will be able to go to the middle school in some way to have their tours that they typically do and engage in some orientation that we were able to do last summer, or the middle school was actually. And Mr. Nunez actually came to FRES last week to pop into some fifth grade classrooms, and we plan to continue that work together. But we have started talking about that. We don't have any details worked out to share yet, but it's definitely on our radar.
Great, thank you. I see this comment about don't take away recess or breaks in favor of completing work. Recess may be the most valuable part in their day in these curious times. Could not agree with you more. We will re-emphasize that point. I can say that kids are still getting recess and breaks. It could be that instead of having as long a time, there might be some work that needs to be finished up because we are having a limited amount of time also with them in school, but that French Road is very good about making sure they do get recess and breaks. Anything you'd say in addition to that, Dr. Rio?
We do have all classrooms go outside as long as it's not freezing cold, and we take them out when it's pretty cold too, but at least 20 minutes a day. So sometimes teachers, like Dr. McGowan shared, will extend that and they have a 30-minute recess and they might say, okay, we have to take 10 minutes off today, but at FRES, we ask all teachers to have recess for a minimum of 20 minutes a day.
Thanks so much. So there's these two other points that I'd like you to comment on while I flip over to the remote comment. One is about flexibility with specialists. Can there be some clarity and more flexibility on assignments and Wednesday Zooms? And the second comment, my children are finding it extra difficult to stay on task and accomplish work on remote days. This is typical for the time of year. Absolutely, you're right in that. Workload isn't necessarily lighting up, even though students may be less motivated, hoping students are getting extra encouragement. So workload being an issue, it came up a little bit in the remote comments as well, but also flexibility around specials. If you could comment on those, and like I said, I'll flip over to the remote comments now too.
Yep, that sounds good. So as far as workload goes, we've kind of, I think overall, we've come to a happy medium kind of place, trying to balance all the needs of the kids and families along with what's best as far as instruction. So, I mean, the good news is we are continuing our instruction at, it's not much slower of a pace, to be honest. And I'm really proud of our students and our teachers for the work that they've been doing. But I know that, the workload can vary. And for some families, it feels like a lot. And the same work for other families might feel like not enough, depending on how fast the kids go through and, what their needs are with support and all those things. So, if you reach out to us and let us know, me or Miss O'Neill or the classroom teachers as well, and in either scenario, if it's too much, if it's too little, if we can do anything to encourage more, we have been very creative to try and think out of the box for our kids this year because we want them to have an awesome year. And I will, be glad to talk with Miss O'Neill and classroom teachers to make a better plan, no matter which, end of the spectrum you're at. And in regards to specials, I'd love to hear more about that too. So if you're here listening and you did write one of those comments and you want to reach out either tonight via, just unmuting yourself now or even emailing me to follow up. I'm curious what, you're thinking, because we're very open to any ideas. And if things aren't working, we want to make them best for our kids and families too. So.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Rio. A couple of other comments here then in the remote section of comments. Scrolled past a couple you may have noticed about reopening that were referenced in my initial comments. This one right here, though, curious, remote socialization could still use improvement and more opportunities offered. Socio-emotional development is important and happens organically in school, but not in remote. So artificial, I think that should be means probably, not men's, should be a priority. So in thinking about that, Dr. Rio, any thoughts about additional opportunities for remote socialization?
We've been trying to, it hasn't been to the extent that we want to yet. And the remote teachers and I and Ms. O'Neill, we meet together once a month. And this is an ongoing topic that we have talked about. So I will say that this is not where we had hoped it would be, because we have grand plans of trying to do different things for kids to bring them together. And Ms. O'Neill and I, if you're a remote parent, we've done breakfast with books. We are trying lunch groups. We're trying different ways to bring kids together. Just yesterday, some third grade classes, kind of did some breakout rooms around different topics, and we're looking to do more of that. There have been some challenges that got in the way, and one of them was scheduling all of these things. But it's an area that I promise you we are still thinking about for the second half of the year. And we do have, I hope you see some more things kind of coming out as the year goes on from both Miss O'Neill and myself and our remote teachers too.
Thank you. Comment here about iPad restrictions, child unable to search for Babe Ruth, but same device could play NPR's Wait, Don't Tell Me, a favorite of mine. We will look into that. Can't imagine. Those filters are often tricky with what they will pick up and not pick up. And we know, there have been kids at different levels that want to do a project on breast cancer, which then it won't allow them to search, or in the home and careers class searching for something around chicken breast, which doesn't allow them to pull that up. And we are always working on how we can make those make more sense while still protecting people. So we'll forward that to our technology people as well. This is an interesting comment about if vaccines are not mandatory, I want to know if my child's teacher has been vaccinated before making the choice to send them back in full time. We've shut off our lives for a year due to COVID. I don't want to send my child back if they're going to be in a room full time with a spreader. So one, my understanding is, and again, not being a useful doctor, that any of the vaccines under emergency authorization cannot be mandated. So at this point, I don't think you would see that happen legislatively anyways, number one. Number two, that's a personal health decision that people make. I don't imagine any circumstance that we would be communicating to anybody about somebody's status relative to a vaccine, although I understand why you would ask this and say this. I just can't imagine as an employer any circumstance where we would be allowed to, or where we would be doing that. However, I do wonder, and there's no tea leaves here, this is just what I've been thinking about, if it will be similar to people who work in hospitals that do not want to get the flu vaccine, which often you'll see in hospitals, if they are required to get the flu vaccine at work and decide not to, they're required to wear a mask, at least prior to when everybody wore masks. This was a common practice in some medical institutions. So I do wonder if long-term, if that's something that will happen, and that's a way, certainly, that somebody would know somebody to get vaccinated. I don't expect that being something that we would report, nor that it would be required. It is our understanding, in some of the initial numbers we're seeing, the conversations we're having, that the vast majority of educators are looking to be vaccinated. I think you'll see a very small number of people not making that choice as well. I talked about the reopening issues and what the barriers would be to us returning. Run out of work by 10 a.m. So what's interesting is, as Dr. Rio and I talked about the feedback prior to this session, there are some people saying there's too much work, the workload is too significant, and there are others saying I run out of stuff and I need more work. So that's certainly something we need to continue to work with the staff on and think through. I think some of that depends on the teacher. It depends certainly on the student, on their situation at home, and the teacher's trying to meet a lot of different masters in that and make sure that they're being equitable, but that all kids that are in their class can achieve the work in the given time. So certainly something we'll pass along to, and just continuing to think about that. I would encourage whomever has posted that to certainly reach out directly to Dr. Rio and to their child's teacher to say, hey, listen, they could use more challenge. They could use more work on this day. That would be important feedback for them to get, and perhaps they would be able to make an adjustment, even if it's on an individual basis. I know they'd like to know that as well. Specials have glitches. We'll point that out too, but I would say, again, if you could reach out and let us know how that's happening or who that is so that we can provide the right support. We are providing a lot of tech support around that, but knowing specifically who that's happening with would be helpful. I'll wrap up with the last couple here. I have seen social media posts from BHS or TCMS during an event with heavy crowding in one room, no adherence to social distancing. This is worrisome. With your opening talks happening, I can't imagine us keeping cases down while celebrations like the one shared on social media are tolerated. I would love for whoever posted this to send me a picture of that, because I can tell you that I'm in those buildings every week, in every one of the buildings every week, and I find that this is not the case. I'm not saying that this didn't happen, and I'm not saying that a mistake was not made, but I'd like to know more about it so we can positively correct that and make sure that that's not happening. I feel like people have been really good about this and paid careful attention to this. Again, this could very well have happened, and I'd like to know certainly more about that so we can make an adjustment if it needs to happen. Summer programming, we typically run summer school, a summer school at the high school, a summer reading program with students from Council Rock and French Road, and an extended school year program for students who qualify for that type of programming at a variety of grade levels. We are likely to run those programs in some type of hybrid format going forward, similar to what we have now. I mean, the planning that's taking place now is to plan for all possibilities in case we are able to do that in person. Remember, part of spreading kids out and providing distance, which you could do with less kids, also then requires more staff to supervise those kids as they are in different spaces. And that then becomes a financial constraint. So that will be something we would consider, although yes, it's less students, we have to look at the resource ability for us to be able to do that. If you have a question about a specific program, I would contact the administrator who may have run that in the past. And thank you for innovative teachers. I thank them too. And reopening the fall, many parents are pushing for full open, but we cannot keep the low transmission rates if we open back up 100% without additional space. Kids won't be vaccinated until maybe late fall. I am concerned about, and I can't scroll down low enough and the way my screen is, but to read the rest of the comment, essentially we're hearing this from people too, people being concerned about reopening before it's really safe to do so. And I guess that's another point that I would make. I think I said this at the beginning. There's a reason why the rates are low. What we're doing is working. And I don't think many things, if anything, has changed since early in the year when these measures were put in place. So we want to make sure we keep that rate low and keep our school community safe as well. I'm going to turn now to the chat and ask Ms. O'Neill if she could share with us, as she was monitoring the chat, were there any additional questions that popped up in the chat or comments that you'd like to share now?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Dr. McGowan, one question, if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more around the work that we have done as a district to look into other districts who are fully opened and their plan to see why we can or cannot do what they are doing.
Well, I would say, first of all, they're the only districts that would be fully open, which is almost none, would be districts that have, again, the space to spread out very small populations of students. So I'll be presented occasionally with examples of people saying, look, they're back, or they're back K-5, they have something different. And I will tell you, in every case, it's because they have the space to spread kids out, which we did look at and measured and, figured out in every classroom how many kids you could have. And then again, to the point that I was just making, it's about having the number of staff members then to supervise kids in those spaces. So if you had half the class in one space, if you could find places to put people, if you had half the kids in one space and half the kids in another, what's the other half of the group doing while the teacher is providing instruction to the group in front of them? And then what kind of day does that look like? How effective is that time? What are they occupied with, and who is with them is a concern. Additionally, because you're removing your mask when you're eating, the space to send kids to go eat is really important to consider too. And do you have enough space? Do you have an ability to do that? And again, the transportation issue becomes a serious concern then as well because of the limit on the number of kids you could have on the bus. And at the secondary level where kids are moving about more, you're talking about passing in the hallway, spending time in the hallway, congregating in the hallway, and not being able to do that. And the number of kids that would come back into the building, the doubling of the size, would prove impossible to keep social distancing. So that's really the barriers that those schools have been able to overcome because of the space they have available to them and the number of kids in their districts. So in some cases, we're talking about very, very, very small districts that have been able to do that.
A question about having orchestra or some of the smaller ensembles return this school year.
Yeah, I think what we will likely be doing now as we move into the second half of the year is looking at possibilities for that. Again, we're into orchestra in particular, the number of kids that would need to come together, we wouldn't have the space to put them all together, but we will certainly consider other alternatives and are there ways to do that. We again run into a transportation issue and having enough kids and then having enough staff to be with those kids as well. Anything else, Ms. Sonia?
That's it for right now. I think you've answered all the other ones.
I think there was one I did, why can't the district look into leasing space off premises to address a physical space issue? And that one was just put in. You know, that is simply the same issue. One, there's a significant cost issue with doing that. Two, space off campus has to be by code that the state education department would require, which most spaces would not meet that code that they require. And third, it would require then hiring additional staff members, and we don't have the resources to do that, to be in those spaces with them. So before we look at the Facebook Live comments, anybody like to unmute themselves, ask questions, make comments, suggestions? It's wide open and the floor is yours.
Dr. McGowan, I just want to say thank you. This is the clarity and transparency in your presentation tonight is it's amazing. I'm really impressed by it. I think a lot of superintendents would probably hide behind some of the state codes and some of the regulations, and I really appreciate that you're willing to say, hey, this is what our space constraints are. I can tell you from a neighborhood perspective here in Brighton, we've actually had some tussles in our neighborhood among adults who are watching social media and watching their preferred news outlets to try and find information about what's possible. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can get some of these comments into writing, whether it's into the Rochester Beacon or into the RBJ or into the DNC, so that there's a greater understanding of what those constraints might be, coupled with what we really need no matter what side of that equation you exist on. So our family being fully remote, wonderful daughter that we have, it would be really nice to keep her occupied sometimes when we're not required to be the adults. You're not a daycare facility. But the reality exists that for most of the last, 8 of the last 9 years, we've relied upon that. And so seeing some of those creative solutions put out there in addition to what the restraints are will be really helpful for us to be able to back up what you're doing and to be able to advocate in the community. And I know Dr. Rio just mentioned it. They did a great program yesterday that was a nice breakout between the classes that was so deeply appreciated. But if we can encourage some of that manifestation from the teaching staff, even if it fails, anything to try something, I think is great if we can back it up.
That's great, Aaron. Thank you. And thank you for the very positive comments. Clearly, my mother must have called you ahead of time, but I do appreciate that. And I would say that, those of you new to the district or new to me, I will never not just tell you the direct truth and where we're at with things. I'm going to take it a step further and address what you're getting at relative to people getting information from different places and what's out on social media. There is a lot out there, and there are groups that are talking about this. I would say just simply contact us. I'll give you the factual information. I'm happy to provide it. We are a complete open book. All of our reopening documents and the guidance documents are on our COVID-19 tab on the website. There is nothing hidden from people, and we're happy to talk about that. And I will address another issue that comes up in that conversation, which is the use of barriers. And that people saying, well, can't you use a barrier? I will tell you, and if Dr. Mendoza was on this town hall, and I'm sure that he would attest to this, I know because we've had this conversation as recently as yesterday, there is zero science around the use of barriers to prevent the spread of COVID. So we see them everywhere, and we see them when we go places, and it seems like a good idea. But when you're in an enclosed space and there's airflow in that space, that barrier that might be up to, your eyes or just over, well, the air just doesn't sit, it still moves, right? So there is still that issue. You're also talking about a hundreds of thousands of dollars investment to purchase barriers throughout the district for a short period of time, relatively speaking. And finally, the barriers don't help you with the notion that you still have twice the number of people moving in a space that need to remove their masks while they're eating, and preventing the airflow in those situations through plastic barriers is simply impossible. And the best practice that was adopted in this county, which is in line with all the guidance that we were provided, is to maintain 6 feet. The barriers can't take the place of that 6 feet of distance. So that continues to be the hinge point for us. We'll see how that evolves over time when vaccination becomes more readily available. But that is really the issue. So thank you again. I really appreciate you saying that. Are there any other questions or comments? Anything we can answer for people?
Kevin, if you wouldn't mind, could I weigh in on a point? And for those of you that don't know me,
Please.
Mark Kokanovich, the Board of Education President, and thank you all for joining this evening. I just wanted to reinforce a couple of concepts because of regular news media, along with social media, especially over the last couple of days, highlighting reported and documented letters from boards of education, letters from superintendents locally, to every entity that there is at a governmental level, Department of Health level right now, essentially asking for guidance. I think it's important for our community to understand Dr. McGowan did a great job on this. He and I talk multiple times a week about this. The staff and our leadership team talks multiple times per day about this. We are planning, we are asking, we are looking. I think there's some misconceptions when people see something in the news. For example, the CDC headline only, teachers don't need to be vaccinated to go back to schools. Well, the entirety of the article talks about with mitigating factors such as masking all, 6 feet of social distance at a minimum, all the things, as Kevin mentioned, that we do. So it's really important for us as a community. And I think the comment a few minutes ago from Aaron, I think we need to do a better job of explaining to the community that we are, a couple of the questions in thought exchange. Why aren't we? Well, we are. We are planning, we are discussing, we're planning multiple scenarios at the same time right now. But number one is safety of everyone involved. And the reason numbers are low is because we're adhering to the guidelines and people are safe. And we want, all of us want more students engaged with their teachers and their classmates in person as soon as possible. But it has to be done safely, and we have to be careful about it. And if you'll notice, one of the things that many entities are asking for and demanding of the governor and threatening to go to court, a lot of that is sort of posturing, if you will, because the guidelines are still the guidelines. The governor's executive orders are still in place. The Department of Health is still the entity. And so people are asking, people are attempting to appear as if they're doing something differently, but we really all are operating under the same official laws, rules, and guidelines. And in those situations within school districts, Brighton is one of the very, very few districts that continues to grow in student population. Most of our neighbors have excess space in every building that they have. They have whole buildings that are virtually empty. So they could choose to split up students within a class, like Kevin mentioned, 24 kids, divide them into two groups of 12, one with a teacher, but the other will end up having a teacher's aide or something like that for part of their day, but they would be in a building. We have no space in our district to do that. Most of you that have been around with us for a while, you understand the capital improvement project. Council Rock is going to be a magnificent school with some more space, but we just can't fit everyone in. We continue to review it. We continue to ask those questions. When we can do it safely, when the guidelines allow, we will be among the first to be able to do it. But I just wanted to assure the community that the Board of Education, even though we are not driving this on a daily basis, we are working on this all the time. We are in concert with other board presidents, with Albany, with our school boards association locally and our school boards association at the state level. And we work together with other districts on this. We're in a moment of time right now where the governor has sort of pushed a lot of this in the last few weeks down to us appearing to be allowing us to do things individually. And it's causing some of this separation and divide and contrarian information. So we just have to be very careful about moving forward.
Aaron, I didn't address one of the things you said. I do want to say regarding communication. I'm working with a small group of the Monroe County superintendents, the BOCES superintendents, and Dr. Mendoza to develop, or will be working on some type of communication piece that gets at what you're indicating we should try to get out there. I couldn't tell you when that will come out or if it will eventually come out, because one of the challenges in this is, one, it's become a highly litigious situation involving entities that, if it was litigious just with us, I could give you more certainty, but because there's other people who are represented by a lot of different people and have different concerns, I can't make a promise. But I can tell you that's something we've talked a lot about, again, as recently as yesterday, in a long discussion about how to help people understand where we're at. Tonight's COVID update, I'm not sure if it's gone out yet. It will be, if not already, shortly out. Most of what I said at the beginning is articulated as best I could in writing to hopefully help people understand that as well. So we need to continue to think about that too, because I realize when I say to everybody, well, the CDC person that said, vaccinations aren't necessary for teachers, or that, everybody should come back to school, reopening should happen. I'm living this every day, reading every piece of it, involved in it, way in the weeds. And I read it and say, no, that's not what they meant. That's not what most people are receiving. And when you mentioned their news source, there's a lot of different news sources. So people are hearing it different ways. And this is, the entire issue with public policy in our nation right now, right? So we've got to think about ways to continue to get information with clarity out to people to help them understand where we're at, and then be open on the other end to listening more than we're speaking, which I'm not doing well right now. But and there is a question I noticed in the chat also, transitioning kids in the remote program to hybrid this school year. If we're fully remote now, will we get the chance to choose hybrid for fall? So we have closed the window for transitioning between programs. We gave as much flexibility as we possibly could for as long as we could. It was different than most districts, in fact, who had people commit for entire semesters or the entire year. And then in December, we announced that window was going to close because we couldn't keep transitioning people back and forth. There's a continuity of instruction issue with the type of program and how well that works for kids. We are willing to look at that on a case-by-case basis if there's an extraordinary circumstance. But generally speaking, we said, this is when it's going to end. Here's why. We need to plan then and know what will be for the remainder of the year. Also creates a tremendous imbalance with people in and out. So right now, there is not an opportunity, again, other than in a extraordinary circumstance. In the fall, though, I would expect we'd start over again. So in other words, we don't know what the models will look like in the fall. I don't know this for sure, but it would not shock me if we were required to or asked to still offer remote options going into the fall, especially if there's not a vaccine for children at that point. I don't know that for sure. I'm just assuming that that's the direction it would go. And if that was the case, I would expect that we'd start over. You wouldn't be still in the program you're in right now. You'd have an opportunity for next school year to figure out what you'd like to do, again, because things continue to change on a daily basis, if not hourly. I don't see anything else in the chat. I didn't see anything in terms of the Facebook live comments, although I will check right now. Nope, still nothing there. Anything else for the good of the order that anybody would like to unmute themselves and bring up? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't had enough of listening to me tonight, you can be like my family and hear me a little bit more. At 7:15, we have the high school virtual town hall. And tomorrow evening at 5:30, kindergarten parents from Council Rock are welcome. And at 6 o'clock, all of Council Rock until 7. And then at 7:45 tomorrow night, 7:45 will be the TCMS virtual town hall. We delayed that a little bit to accommodate other meetings and events in the district as well. Feel free, as always, call, write. I'd say stop by, but we're not doing that. But please call, write, text, anything you'd like to do. We'd like to connect with you and answer your questions and be there for you and support your family. And above all else, if your child needs something, please let us know, because we're always trying to think, always before this, but especially right now, how we can individualize and support families with the myriad of challenges they're encountering. I hope you're all safe and that you stay safe and healthy. Take care and have a wonderful evening.
This has been a special presentation from French Road Elementary School.